All right. Well, so I've done lots of content on the levy coming up. Well, actually, the levy's going on right now, right? Because
Yep,
today is the 10th, April
yep.
10th, right?
Early voting's already gone. I voted today.
Hey,
Simple process.
not too painful.
No, I would encourage people. It is your civic duty. So showed up at 8 o'clock, gave the ladies about till 8:02 till I walked in. Back in the truck at 8:04, head back home. So if you're gonna vote, get out and vote. And voting early is the way to go.
Is there a total of like 4 clicks, 8 clicks? Like, not too many.
I think technically I counted six, but don't quote me on that because I don't want to be wrong.
So, no reason not to do it. I hear some reasons, but anyway. So I am with Adam today. Adam is a parent who reached out, wanted to give a different perspective on the levy and share some thoughts, perspectives, and opinions there. So that's where we're going to start. What would you like to start with?
Yeah, no, I think just the quick background, obviously. So, we've moved to Marysville here in 2019, and I've got two kids in school, my wife and I. So we've got one that'll be starting kindergarten here this fall, and then we've got currently have a second grader at Northwood Elementary.
So if we're on the background, why Marysville?
Yeah, so I'm originally an Ohio graduate or Ohio State graduate. Grew up in Shelby, Ohio, about an hour and a half north of here, and at the end of the day, we had an opportunity to come back to Columbus. So my wife and I have moved around the country for about 10 years, and after 10 years, we had an opportunity to kind of come back home for us. And we knew we wanted to be in the Columbus area. I needed to from a work perspective, and we really wanted to look at opportunity. We looked at a lot of different options here, and we really felt that Marysville was one that best fit our lifestyle and best fit what we wanted to see in a community. We
So
looked
what did
at
that look like?
honestly, for us, started a small town community. It looked like a very supportive community. One of the big things, and not to pick on where I grew up, but you drive through a downtown of a community, and you can judge a lot from driving downtown, right? When you see local businesses like we have here, you see involvement, you see people on the street. You know that they're wanting to be here, and that people want to be here. People are being supportive, and you don't get that everywhere. And the other really big thing is just the size of the community, right? It's got a lot of the things that we need. I know there's a lot of folks out there, us included, that would like a Target. We're getting the Chick-fil-A, right? So we're getting pretty close. But at the end of the day, it really fit that niche of it's still a small community, really could provide what we needed to see. And then really it looked like a community that was very supportive. We looked at Delaware, Dublin, Reynoldsburg, Pickerington, a lot of their towns in the Columbus area, and we're pretty familiar with here. And this is just the one that really felt like home and really looked like where we wanted to raise our kids.
Good. Did you look at the schools for that?
We did look at the schools for that. Anytime you move, is this something you always look at? And I always used to joke with my wife. I grew up in Shelby, and Shelby's a good sized community, but smaller than Marysville. And their school system, when I was in school, had challenges. I said, their schools were good enough for me, right? And I was okay. But then once you have kids, that perspective really changes, right?
For sure.
And you become a parent, and then you got to look at, hey, what can I give my kids, right? And what does that school age development look like, and how does that impact it? So for us, schools was a really large, important buying decision of what drove us here. And as we moved in, as we saw we moved in, it seemed like at that time, and still today, a very strong school system, great supportive folks in the organization that are helping them to get there, and that's where we wanted to be.
hmm And so if you're watching this podcast after watching the one with Dr. Zach Howard, our new superintendent, I'm wearing the same shirt. And so in that conversation, one thing that kind of clicked with me, and just speaking to becoming a parent and having a different perspective in life in general, the generational part of a community, I didn't really process until that conversation in terms of talking about state minimums, what's potentially our future for the schools. And I've heard in development conversation, it seems as though some zoning code or writers of code don't really like their kids. And I've heard a developer say that joking that they didn't create a scenario that allowed for all housing types, which is part of the reason housing is what it is these days. Anyway, it just made me think that is one reason that younger generations don't come back to a community if the levy doesn't go through and continues. And will our kids come stay here?
Yeah,
And
no,
I just didn't think of that until that point.
yeah, and that's a great question. When we had the opportunity to come back to Ohio, I would go back to Shelby if my job would have allowed, and that was a great community, and I felt that growing up. But it is the big question, and I think the other question that tees off of that is, we want to be here, we want to be in this community, but we're also not tied here. My wife and I both work remote, and so we're considering or talking about what are the other options, right? And so we want to stay here. We want to continue to support Marysville and see it grow, and be a part of that. But at the end of the day, we also, having my kindergartner start this year, we're looking at what does the next 12 years look like for her. And if we don't think that we can get that here, we've got to look at other options. And that's one of the most challenging things right now as a parent, especially when we look at everything else that's going on in the environment, everything else in politics, which we don't need to get into, but there's a lot, right? And, starting out, if we had kids maybe towards the end of their career, it wouldn't be as much of a discussion now, but we're really still young and a lot of young parents here in Marysville. And it's something you got to consider is what are your options? And then, like you said, are you willing to come back in the future to continue to move this community forward?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's just a challenging point that I come to a lot of what is community these days, because a lot of people move around and all of the different factors in that, and it's challenging to get through. Yeah. So what's first thing on your list?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing for me is as I look at the levy, the impact of where we're at today, is really considering some of the things that as we look at the children's development as they start off, that we've kind of lost, and for me, one of the things I really wanted to hit on today in my experience is the loss of our school resource officers and what that I think really means. Those have been a really big part of our community, and I had the great opportunity back in 21, 22 to volunteer in the schools through a watchdogs program that they had, where they actually allowed dads to come in the school and volunteer for a day. And that was partially run by the school resource officers. And so through that, I got a lot of time to experience. Through those 2 years, I think I spent about 10, 11 days in Northwood Elementary and really sit there. And the first thing that hit me in a conversation with a local member is, what do they do all day, right? Do you think those guys just sit there and eat donuts all day? And they don't,
Hmm.
right? They have an office there in the facility, but they're not there to eat donuts. They start their day and they're sitting there welcoming the kids. And the first thing that amazed me, they're still pretty new at that time, is they knew three-quarters of the kids by name, and not even just knowing the kids by name, knowing what's going on and knowing that hey, this kid has a special stuffed animal and it's not here today. Like, what happened to it, right? So as the day
It's
starts,
always a relationships.
yeah,
Yep.
it's huge relationship driven. So those guys and gals were in the schools every day, right? And there was the safety aspect of it, and that is a big piece. But the thing I want to talk about is there's more than just the safety, right? There's the fact that there are another set of eyes and another set of resource in the building to be able to help and support our folks in that place. And to give you just a quick story, I was there on a day where they had a student that came off the bus, was brought straight to the office, and had an incident on the bus where he had actually hit one of the bus aides, and found out that student was sent home the day before for behavior issues. And it was a struggle. And so they sat there and they were talking. The officer, which was Chris Deal, who's a fantastic human being, was talking with the principal and said, what can we do? And he's like, let me see what I can do for the day, right? Because they had two options. They could send the kid home, which was probably the primary option, what they were going to do, or they could try to figure out how do we turn this around. And the challenge, first thing is, as a dad, I looked at and saw, and this is like a second grader, is the behavior when he came in that office, he was fiery. He was cussing to a point where you and I probably would have started blushing. I mean, the words this kid was saying were aggressive, and it didn't take long once they kind of let them get on a system for Officer Deal to say, "Hey, you're coming with me today." Right, very seriously, and you walk out of the office, and he's sitting there, and
Kind of a
I'm
scared straight
I'm sitting there,
program.
I'm like, "Where's this going to go today?" And Chris looks at me, he says, "Hey," he's like, "Come see me in an hour, see how things are going." So I went about my day of the volunteer activities and helping out in classrooms, and just being there to support the school. And I checked back in, and an hour and a half, 2 hours later, things have turned around. He's sitting in his office doing homework, and it's like, but he's still not really happy. You can tell that, right?
Hmm.
And at lunch, by lunchtime, really, we're 3 hours in the day, right? He was turned around and in a lot better position. And so when I look at that, and that experience showed me that, they're not just sitting there, they're not just there for the safety. That is a big piece of it, but they're also there to help out the administration, to help out the staff as much as they can, to be a strong authoritative figure in the building, but also, have a little bit of that freedom to be real with the kids. And, that's a huge miss to have on top of all the other benefits of having that additional individual in the schools. And, I know one of the officers also has a therapy dog, and they move her around as needed to help in situations because let's frank it, we think a lot of people talk about our kids being soft these days, and you could debate that for a while, but there's a lot going on. And my experience of being in the schools and seeing how they interact with folks shows that we've got kids that have challenges, we've got kids that have struggles, and sometimes there needs to be somebody else there to help. And with the size and capacity we have, that person's not always there. So just having that one more individual in the building, who can take the time, who can break off and focus on one, two, three, four kids throughout the day to help just give them a break, is really big to me and really important to me. And we unfortunately kind of let those folks go and sneak out under the rug. I know the individual schools tried to celebrate them, But you look at today, they kind of disappeared, and we haven't talked about it since. So there's a really big impact there and a really big miss, first and foremost, of having those folks
So I don't
in our
even know.
system.
Is that where does that land with a passage or fail of a levy? Does that bring them back? That's one thing I haven't kept up on.
Yeah, the understanding I have is that with the passing of the levy, the school resource officers would come back.
Big.
But I think as we discussed, I mean, there's a lot of dynamic situations there, and so that's as it is as I understand it today, and would really look forward to that.
I thought so, and the way I viewed most of the passage of the levy is reinstatement back to kind of how things were and continue to be.
Yep.
Okay. Um. So to Watchdog that went with RSOs.
So kind of at the same time. So partially, it was a national program that the school was participating with for about 2 years, and then they kind of backed off, and they were still trying to do some grassroots, I would say, efforts in that space. But that was being managed by the school resource officers, and so when
So
they
it's
left,
it's
they're not looking at that program today as an opportunity. And for me, that was a big miss. Like, I've got a great opportunity to work that I can sneak in a couple days and do that. And it was awesome for me to interact, both with my kids at school to see how they are during the school day, also see their friends, but then also just see the reality of the community we're in. Like I said, I was in the schools 10 and 11 days over a 2-year period, and really see some of those struggles and be able to understand that better. And it's helped with the relationship, even how I talk to my own kids now, to just see the bigger picture.
mm-hmm. Hmm. What about the biggest topic? And I know you're trying to talk about some other things. The biggest topics has been the extracurriculars and the I don't want to call them extras.
The unified arts.
Yeah, unified arts from a technical standpoint, but from a community standpoint, if we just do our bare minimums, is that really what we want to be? And that's a conversation I've been trying to have more and more of who do we want to be when we grow up as a community, and as we continue to grow, and according to the analogy of growing up, what are the things that we value as a community? Obviously RSOs is an important thing, and I think sitting in my wife's dance studio right here. One of the things I've heard her say a lot, every kid is one caring adult away from success. And that's kind of what I was hearing in my head as you were speaking to RSOs. And that comes through in Brianna Bizzaro sitting here talking about the music program and all of the other conversations that I've had around some of those extra things that aren't required. But yes, the unified arts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a huge impact here. And when I look at even my personal experience, so back in 2005 when I graduated in Shelby, they were having some challenges with levy situations, right? This is not a new thing for the state of Ohio. And they were looking at cutting things like band and choir, and they were in the same
Yep.
spot that we're in today in a lot of ways. And you look at what that does for an impact of folks. I mean, it's huge. Myself personally, I was a band kid in high school. I was part of the Ohio State athletic pep band, so not the marching band, but part of the pep band when I was at Ohio State. And had a lot of other activities like FFA that really have shaped me to where I am. So, I grew up small town Shelby of Ohio, didn't grow up on a farm, ended up with a degree from Ohio State in agriculture, and work for John Deere Company today, right? And so, I look at the impact of just the difference in activities of not that everybody that maybe participated in Mamma Mia is going to go work in theater, right? But how that broadens their horizons, how it opens them up to new things, and then just gives them, I tell you what, a heck of a challenge to step outside their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things working in the corporate world is talking to people. For some people, it's hard. Presenting to groups is hard. And I tell you what, I've seen it myself. Of you put two high school kids together and do a blind test of, you put one of those kids that was in Mamma Mia versus somebody else that doesn't have any experience, and just talk to them and say, do a job interview, right? The experience you're going to get between those two is completely different. So, even though we think about programs like that of, we might get pigeonholed and think, well, that's just for folks that want to do that. It's not. And the skills that they learn through the trials they go through to participate in those activities will broaden them for anything else they'll face.
Yeah, I
in
think
life
there
in
were
the future.
70 in that program, and a good majority were other than on stage.
Yeah, and
Speaking
I
of that.
think to that point, the Little Mermaid earlier this year, I think had over 200 folks audition, if I remember right, and I think that
Bunsold?
one, Bunsold,
Yeah.
and had almost 100 folks participate, right? And so
Yeah, they had to cut half, I think is what I heard, which to have that many kids interested is pretty cool.
yeah, and you look at people always say, well, kids these days they're tied to technology, they're tied to their phones, and to be able to get kids off of those things and give them opportunities, and then see that there's that much interest where they actually unfortunately have to limit it down and cut it, right, is tremendous. And I go back to even when I was in school. I mean, we had a theater club and they did events. I think there was 30 kids in it. It was the same 30 kids every year.
Yep.
Right. And to see that growth that we've seen in Marysville of those types of programs is huge. And that's, again, getting back to my concerns. That's a concern of how do you get that back, right? Even a year off, a 2-year off sabbatical if that were to happen. To rebuild a program like that truly does take years. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yep, that was one of the things Biz, as the kids call her, was talking about it. Of 1 year off, it can really dramatically hinder those little nuances that really make a program successful in whatever it is, and that momentum. I lost my train of thought. Apparently, doing 5 of these in a week, you burn
Might
out.
be a little much.
Marker in. Well, and everything starts to like blend together. Of like, did I say that before we
Yeah.
were recording or after we were recording? I mean, you can start rambling if you want or whatever you want to go. Oh, yes, that's what it was. Editing these things can suck, so if I don't have good notes. Markers. Fine. So another thing that came to me in going through these conversations about the levy, one of the things I hear a lot as a real estate agent, people talking about the community, what is there for kids to do? It's one of the reasons I like the small town is you find something else to do. You don't just go to the mall or all the other stuff. I think it's good to have some of that creativity in what you do. But irregardless of these extra things, whatever they are, band, FFA, the musical, or whatever, some of these extra things that might be hindered and have less of an opportunity for kids to do them. Isn't that what we want? Is our kids to have things to do? I mean, I assume you want your kids to be involved in things and not, idle hands or the devil's playground, if you will. So, that came to me recently that we need productive things for kids to do, and in a community that's growing and needs that stuff. I was talking to the director of the Y the other day, and he said, we kind of lack for the size of community we are. It seems like we'd have more rec programs and more things going on. And so anyway, I assume as a parent, that's important to you. And would you say second grade and almost kindergarten? Here soon, that's going to become more of a thing.
Yeah, no, it's a thing for sure. And, I think back to my personal time in school, and, all of us have had impactful teachers, right? And when I think of my top 3 examples, they're not from any of my core academics. Now, one of them was from a math teacher, but the example I have is from when he was my track coach, right? And so when I was in sports, and then I think about my experience in FFA and band, that's where I learned a lot of real actual things of how to deal with people, how to work through things, how to, get into to problems and then get back out of them. And I think that's the thing that, a lot of those things, they happen still in core academics. There's no question. But those are the opportunities where kids really start to grow outside of that and get those unique experiences that they might not get in a classroom. Because when you've got classrooms that are, higher than 26, 28, 30 kids per classroom, it's a lot. I can tell you from experience of helping out in the schools. So I always like to pick the days when I was there was right before break, which are the craziest days. Most educators will tell you. And trying to keep 26 first graders from, just tearing the room apart the day before Christmas break lets out is a lot. Right. And we think about the impact to unified arts in the schools. Right. And they've talked about cuts and talked about, things like gym class being reduced to a couple times a year. Right. And the same with art.
Just crazy.
The thing that I think a lot of people maybe don't realize or don't see is, part of that is, to teach kids skill. Right. Gym classes to teach kids skills, to try to get them, a little bit out there to get them some experience. But the other thing is it's a break in the day. Right. And so, one of the things that we've got to remember as adults is, I work 8, 9, 10 hours a day, depending on the day. I don't sit at my desk all day. I can't. Right. There are times in the day I got to go walk outside. I got to go downstairs to the water cooler and hang out for a couple minutes to vent. Right. Sometimes you need that mental break and you need that physical distraction, because not every day do things go well.
Well, and sometimes it's for the teachers to have planning time. There's all those kind of breaks too. So it goes for the adults as well.
And that is a huge thing too. And so when you look at, the recent shift of planning time, yes, they had to do that to support the teachers. But when it comes to where we're at for the day and how that impacts the day of school, it really doesn't save them or give them that time of opportunity to get ready for the afternoon or maybe chill out a little bit for the morning, because it can be a lot. And I think that's one of the biggest things I see, with my kindergarten starting is, that break during the day, giving them that outlet to shift their priorities for a little bit, to change to something else, to distract them from whatever mood or attitude they might have been in before, and is huge. And so when I look at the loss of and the reduction of the unified arts, to me, there's a big piece of the creativity and all the things that you get from that. And then there's also the just impact of what's that's going to do for their behavior and their time during the day. And I'll tell you what, a second grader coming home from school these days, she's tired. And I have a rule. I ask her one question when she gets in the car. And depending on that answer, I may not ask a single other question or I may talk to her, right? And it took me a while to realize that because as a parent and as an adult, I kind of let it go and I'm like, man, why can't I talk to her when I pick her up? But then I started to realize that, hey, there's days when I get off work, I don't want to talk to people, right?
Yep.
And she's had that same experience because she's on from the time that we drop her off till the time we pick her up, right? So I think that's the thing that we forget about a lot of times is, it's not just all the benefit of the development and the learning is that's a break of what they need to do for the day to get them through the rest of the day and give them that experience so they're ready.
Yep. Yeah. And to go off script a little bit, I listened to a podcast of a guy saying schools these days are educating slash training a generation for an economy that doesn't exist anymore. And so sometimes I kind of back up from that and say, what are some of the hardships here? Because it's a fast moving world that we're living in and things are changing. AI, I mean, coming out recently. Are we going to know what that is tomorrow? Or is it going to be 10 years till we figure out how AI changes things? But I also think about how sometimes I'm curious what we're striving for and pushing kids too hard. And is that the reality that they're going to live in? So they need to learn how to deal with it or not. But either way, speaking to this conversation, having some well-rounded days, having some well-rounded experiences to me is it. I just kind of wrote a note of one of the things I like to think about is we got to leave room for the magic. And if it's always go, you don't have breaks, you don't have these unified yards or whatever those extra things are, the SRO office or the officers in schools, like you said, is a different and another experience and another opportunity for a different adult to pour into those kids and help almost to an individualized learning standpoint. If it's all just tailored straight down the line, there's no room for movement and kids can get left in the fringes. And so to me, that goes back to that. What do we want from a community moving forward? If we want that well-rounded perspective, this is what we've got to do.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too, you mentioned some of the tools that exist today, and there are great tools in education and AI and computers. But the one challenge that, we see, and quite frankly, I'm a little nervous about is there's great tools to help teach kids in that space. But at the same time, I don't need them on a computer all day. Right. And there's challenges, there's struggles there. There's proven health impacts of myopia that can exist if kids do spend too much time on screen and technologies. So as we look at class size increasing, right, that's a big driver of it's a great tool for the teachers to be able to help manage and give them a technology tool that can maybe self-pace with them and help educate them. But at the same time, there's struggles that come with that too. So it's trying to find the balance of where that falls. And, they have a pretty good balance of that today. But we've got concerns as they increase in size and increase of the needs they need to do, right? That tool probably will be leaned on more.
What I was going to bring up is I saw an anonymous post on one of the community Facebook pages from supposedly a student saying there's too much screen time in schools. I don't see that, or I don't have any perspective on that. What's your perspective on? You kind of alluded to it's managed now. Do you have any proof that it's too much, or is that? I'm kind of skeptical. Is that somebody? It was an anonymous post on Facebook, so is that somebody who's cranky about something and trying to stir things up? I've never heard that there's too much screen time in school.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, and again, I've got a second grader today, and looking at that side, I mean, they spend a couple hours on technology in a school day, right? And I don't know if there is an official goal for the school of what that time is, but they do spend time on it. And part of it is, I mean, there are fantastic tools out there that will really grow and challenge students, depending on how they answer it, right? So we think about, when we grew up taking standardized math tests, right, and learning with the rest of the class, where with the whole class, usually you got to teach to your average or teach below. Some of these tools now will actually, let those kids that maybe are ready for that challenge go ahead and take it on, which is a great positive thing. But then you have to balance the second side of that of when is too much. So, in this case, I'd assume if it was truly an anonymous Facebook post, it might have been an older student that felt like there was a lot, right? And the question is, well, when is enough? I mean, good or bad, I spend 8-9 hours a day on my computer for work, and that's what I do if I'm in the office, which turns into a lot, right? And we know that as adults, and we think about if that's the experience there that our kids are getting, that's a struggle too. So we shouldn't be surprised if maybe kids feel that way. And as an adult, I have concern of managing class sizes as class sizes continue to grow. Right, that's one way to do it. And I don't have a a blame or a downside on the departments for doing that, but it's a need they may have to go to,
Yeah.
which is concerning.
For sure. And more, I was backing up earlier and speaking to what's the future economy? What is that? Because like you just said, if that's what adults do is sit in front of computers, well, why shouldn't kids do it now? And just what is it going to look like? I think there's so many things changing. It's hard to really tell. So yeah, like you said, it might be appropriate that somebody's calling out that there's too much screen time. It's not something I'm connected to. I have not been exposed to any of those comments. So
Yeah, I know. Just period as a parent, it's hard to manage, right? Of what is the right amount inside and outside of school, and so that's a big struggle for a lot of parents today. Is how do you set how do you set those limits?
and kind of on a small side note tangent, when I was on AI earlier, I forget what it popped up, but it was one of these like, hey, you've got an update or firmware kind of things, but it was more of a hey, here's what you're working on. You've done a lot of great things and working on this project and that project. What are your goals for the next 5 years? And it was just very like motivational, inspirational. I'm like, this is the most like supported I've felt in the last, but like just that future of, and I heard somebody say that the biggest downside he saw to AI were lonely young men in basements somewhere and foreign entities making chatbots to be friends with them and convince them to go do things against the government. And I think that's just somewhat of a reality, unfortunately, not to go there. But I think that is part of this conversation of it's kind of scary that is part of the conversation, but what's it going to look like? And anyway, just commenting on it's not just a tool like a calculator on my phone.
Yeah.
It's starting to become something that's asking you intimate questions about your goals and congratulating you and supporting you and encouraging you, at least in my experience in that prompt. And so
yeah, well,
that's just the start.
A little throwback. I don't know if they would have called it AI then, but you remember the guy named Clippy from Microsoft?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, you start typing a letter and Clippy pops up, says, hey, it looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like some help? I really liked it, at least when he popped up. At least I was in the right direction.
Yep.
But, that's not brand new, but it is a challenge, right? And it is something that's hard to figure out. And along those lines, you look at scammers today, and I apparently still have some unpaid tolls that somebody keeps texting me about. And unfortunately, I'm gonna wait till they show up with a letter, but it is a reality.
Yeah. So anyway, just in relation back to education and the challenges that they're against, and that's only going to be leaned on more with the failure of this levy, as you're alluding to, with class sizes. There's only so much they can do. And so, anyway, nice little tangent. All right, what else on your notes? I don't have to look at my phone. Sorry. I don't print things off often, so when I do.
Yeah, I think that's most of it. The only one I had was the impact of the levy failure personally for us, or
Yep.
like I hit on in the intro of just looking at options, and there's a message levy or like the call to action, ask if you.
Yeah. I mean, mostly just go vote. And I've tried to temper that with the right. Excuse me. Get educated and go vote, because I hate listening to just an echo chamber of the Levy campaign last year or the last time around, and this time wasn't much better. All I heard him say is they get up on stage and say, the schools are great, go vote for the levy. Everybody that agrees with you and is going to vote yes is going to go vote anyway. You did nothing to dissuade or encourage somebody to change their opinion. And so anyway, I feel it's appropriate to say, do what's right for you, but make sure you're smart about it. And so that's really all I've leaned on, is to say, be educated, give facts, because there's way too much opinions. But I think the only thing I would continue with is being a parent, the personal emotional side of that, of the longevity of the impact on your kids. I think mostly speaking to like talking to Bree, a kid, like there's one kid, Mac, who's like called the sound, lights and sound, and done all the backstage stuff, like kind of ran it and done fantastic. Without a program like this, she would have never done that. It's kind of like the whole, I've seen read books and whatever. Like Albert Einstein wouldn't be who he was if that one person didn't. I guess there was some guy, some scientist or mathematician or something that like came to his house as a kid once a week for lunch or for dinner, helped him go down this path. So you never know what those things are. So I think if you can speak to that somewhat personally in reference to your kids as a parent, to me that's a good message to kind of end with. Of like, I really hope my kids have as many experiences as possible, and I think you already said that. But like ending on that, and then just encourage people
Okay.
to vote and get educated appropriately. All right, so I think we've covered most of what we wanted to cover here. But if we had to end on anything, I think I would speak to the future of your kids and the impact that a decision like this that people are making would have. What's your mind come up with?
Yeah, it's a challenge these days, as we laid out earlier, and I think for us, we get back to why we chose to be here originally. It's the offering that our school system has within the community, and the offering that we've got to grow and let our kids learn and be challenged and get out there. I've got a daughter who's interested in musical activities and has tried some stuff out at the Red School, and she's really enjoyed it, right? And she went to Mamma Mia 2 weeks ago or a week ago, and there's a couple kids that came up on stage that talked about the reality of where we're at today. And my daughter came home, and the first thing she told me is like, "Dad, like I don't know that there's gonna be another play." And it's something that we've seen Little Mermaid. She's seen, I think they did Frozen recently too, that we went to too, and it's a huge opportunity that she has, and she wants to be challenged in. And it's something that right now looks like may not happen in the future. And as a parent, it's a strong concern for us. And as we look at my youngest starting kindergarten this year, and I look at the responsibility to try to do the best I can by my kids. I sit here and ask myself, it's like, well, at what point does something need to change, or are we going to have to do something different, right? Am I giving that to them? And I think that's the hardest part. As we look at it, a Levy failure, and we stay in Marysville, our kids will be okay. Like it's not. There's bigger things in life, and we know things will be okay. Is it the best that we'll be able to give them? No, it's not. Is it the middle of the road even? I'm going to have to question that if we're in that position, right? And so, I think as parents, you want the best for your kids, and there's no question in that. And I think all of the educators that I've interacted with in this community want the best for the kids too, because I don't know if you know this, you really don't go into education for the money, right? It always amazes me. I've got a sister who's a teacher, and it amazes me the passion of these individuals have, right? And what they're willing to do to support the community, to grow the community, to grow the kids. And, that's hard to come by. And
Yep.
at some point too, one of my concerns in the future is, with the struggles we've got today, if I'm a new teacher or that one teacher that's going to change some kids' lives, why would I want to come to Marysville? Right? If I've got to worry about the position we're in, if I've got to worry about the job I may or may not have in the future, right? Why would we want that? And, we obviously all, I think, want the best for our kids. And that includes, how do we get the best staff? How do we get the best folks to help educate them in the future? And, a failure of the levies, we see it, is going to put us at an almost impossible hill to climb to stay in the position we're at today. And, I think the most concerning thing for me is folks like to maybe not see we have a tremendous school system with the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And in all the places we've lived, Marysville is got to be the strongest or the second strongest of any of the places that we've lived in the 15 years that we've moved around the country. And I think folks don't recognize that. We take it for granted a lot to see what's out there and see what has been built here. And
Being at a high school for 20 years, I've seen that time and time again. Marysville, you don't understand what it is.
yeah, I was at the most recent board meeting where they recognized a lot of the scholar athletes and a lot of the different folks. And they talk about, different groups that were there and the support that they get. And it's like, they're doing tremendous things. The kids in this community are doing tremendous work. The educators we have are doing tremendous work to get them there and keep them there. Right. And now it's up to us as the rest of the community of how do we keep that happening? How do we keep supporting them so that they can continue to do that?
Yeah, we've got to express that that's the values we keep in this community, and that's what we want.
Yeah, for sure.
And how do we do that?
Well,
Go vote.
Go vote, right? And I said earlier, voting is your civic duty, right? So I'm not going to tell you which way you need to go vote today, but you need to be educated on what the reality is. And the one other thing I'd just say about it is I think they've done a great job to show in the data that is out there of what they're doing and what they have at their resources and where we stand up against a lot of the rest of the communities here.
Yep, and I would encourage you if you don't know what those are, you haven't pulled those from the correct sources, make sure you look for those because they are there.
Yep.
And I've heard plenty of people say there's not information. There is if you're looking.
Yep, and make sure you're getting it from a good source too. I will tell you, Facebook is not a great source. depending on how you're looking at it. But it does
For entertainment
oftentimes,
or information?
well, it's great for entertainment at times, maybe for a little bit of a frustration, but there are a lot of other good places out there, right? And Marysville Matters has been doing a great job of trying to point in directions of where some of the true source of truths are, is one other example. So there's a lot of great information out there. But at the end of the day, yeah, you need to go vote. It's your personal decision on what you want to do. But you need to go get that done. And like I said, early voting is the way to go. In and out in a jiffy,
Get going.
and be good to go.
Awesome. Well, thanks for Karen. Thanks for being a part of the community. Yeah, if you need help voting, I'm sure either of us will give you a ride if you need a ride there, if that's your hardship, whatever it might be. Again, thanks for your time. Thanks for Karen. Thanks for reaching out. I'm happy we could do this and put out a different perspective, and hopefully somebody out there will find some good stuff in this. If you do, leave a comment down below, comment somewhere to let us know what you value in these conversations or what you want to see moving forward. If you would like to come talk about some good stuff and take that seat over there, I'd love to have you if it's some good stuff we can promote. And if you'd like to stay up to date on what's going on, or at least what I'm paying attention to, subscribe to my newsletter, the Good Stuff Marysville newsletter. I'll link that down below, or just follow along on social media. Until then, take care.